When we look at surface things, we don't realize what was there before. This is very true when we look into a town. Moonta is a thriving town. Moonta is located 165 kilometers northwest of Adelaide. It was inhabited by Naranga Aborigines when Matthew Flinders passed it around 1802. It may not be very big, but its children, they're well fed, they play sports, people have all the amenities, the health is very good. It's an ideal town, as good as you can get them in Australia. But things were not always the same. Go back to 1860s and you'll be shocked if you come to Moonta. You would wonder whether I'm in a slum basti of Bombay or maybe somewhere in Bangladesh or in another third world country. People are living in poverty, many of them in makeshift huts.
Out here on the mine site, in amongst the dust and the dirt and the slime and the noise of the mine. And so water was in short supply. To overcome that, they built underground water tanks and ran the water off their roofs and their drains into these underground tanks. And that's all very fine, but of course they had underground toilets and they had horses and cows and goats, and also there's 600 children buried in children's graves. Now they died of the effects of typhoid and cholera, brought about by the unhygienic living conditions in which they lived. Up to 120 a week, the height of the epidemics.
There are not many schools for children to go to. And to top it all, there are about 300 child labor between the age of 10 and 14 who are working in the mines for a pittance.
Picky boy, and what they did, they hand sorted the ore. I'll show you some photos of them later. Thereby high-grading the ore before it went to the concentrator plant. When they got to be 14 years old, they could apply for a job as a miner. Picky boys were paid about 11p a day, and a miner was paid about $6 or £3 a week.
This was the situation of Moonta just over 150 years ago. You can't make it out unless you come and visit the copper mine, which is on display to show what this place was like. Let us go and take a look at Moonta. During that time, South Australia was a colony by itself. Australia as we know it today did not exist. There were some settlers in the Eyre Peninsula in what is Moonta now. But the land was not very fertile. There was lack of water. The settlers had sheep to graze on the land. And there's an interesting story that one of the working hands on one of these farms, he saw some green rocks, sent them for sampling. He found out that these rocks are nothing but copper ore. A number of other mines were found nearby.
They discovered copper at Kapunda, and in 1849 they discovered copper at Burra, which is about 100 and something kilometres to the northeast of here.
A lot of miners and a lot of other people to support these miners came to the area. Most Cornish miners were Methodist as opposed to Catholics, which form majority in other states. The Cornish are Celtic people, as are the Irish, Welsh and Scots, and they inhabited Brittany in France. Until 1770, they had their own language. Methodists among Christians are characterized by great simplicity and asceticism. They are more like sannyasis.
This is the church.
A huge church
Just fiddle
which
down
can
in the tunnel.
accommodate 1,250 people at a time was built by the Cornish, who had to do physical work all day in the mine, then come and build their own home, and after that they had to find time to build their church. 150 years ago, families used to be large. It was not uncommon for a family to have 7, 8, or 12 children. These large families had to be supported by a single income earner. But then, like everywhere else in the world, they saw these children as resources rather than as burden. Many of these children, right from the age of 10, would start work.
Years of age to 14 years of age, and they were under fairly strict control. So it wasn't easy work. They had to sort the good ore from the bad. My understanding of the life expectancy of the mine, they were better off here in Moonta than they were in Cornwall. Now, life expectancy in Cornwall, 50 years was a very old man.
When this ore was brought up, it had iron ore mixed with rocks and dirt. A big table was laid out, and up to 10 boys at a time used to work to separate the ore from the dirt and stones. And the tables on which they used to work were called picky tabs. Being very young and naturally interested in play, sometimes these boys would not care for the work and play with each other. A supervisor was allocated for each of these tables to make sure that these kids do not play in their childhood but do serious and good work. The prosperity of South Australia and that of most of Australia, we owe so much to these children who gave their childhood away so that their families could be fed, but also so that Australian colonies could become viable and the future generations to come could live with the prosperity that we have today. The Moonta mines have made an important contribution to Australia's economy. It has the distinction of being the first mining company in Australia to pay over 1 million British pounds in dividends. They were crucial to the prosperity of the fledgling economy of South Australia. Money from the Moonta mines helped to establish the University of Adelaide. The hard labor put in by those children and the miners has resulted in the prosperity of South Australia. For quite some time, children were living in places where there were no schools. And of course, most of the people who came were very religious people. And it was important for those children to go to church on Sundays. This was a discipline of the parents that every child had to obey. And that was the place where they would get some education. But whatever they learned in the church helped them a lot. One of the picky table boys, whose name was John Warren, born in 1856, he later on went into politics and eventually became the premier of the state. Little did the nuns and the priests who used to teach these little kids on Sundays, little did they realize how far this education would take them. It is said that literally everyone went to the church and that the mine captains always set up the back and took mental note of any miner or worker who was not present on Sunday. They say harsh condition produce great men and women. Saint Mary MacKillop, though not living in Moonta, was living in a similar town in Panola where she started her school, which is free for poor children. You can see the instruments they used to use in those days. There were no ball pens. Paper was very expensive in those days. So people used to use an ink pot or an inkwell, as I'm told, with a writing instrument made out of bamboo stick or peacock feathers, and you can see them here. The living conditions and work conditions were not great in Moonta during 1850s and 1860s. It was a hazardous place to live. I met a volunteer whose grandfather was one of these picky boys. He told me some of the stories that he had learned from his grandfather. His grandfather lived under what would be called as atrocious conditions today. But I'm glad to see, and I'm sure he's also glad, that his grandchildren, they are living in one of the best places on earth, and one of the best countries on earth. The job for picky boys came to an end. Mining became operations for big boys or big companies. They would bring huge machines and literally tear a hill apart. They would dig all the ore out of it, throw all the dirt, and create a new mountain. I saw this when I was in Broken Hill, where there used to be a mountain. All of it was dug out, and the dirt was put around to create another mountain. Same thing we can see around Moonta. This is one of the pits that has been dug. The tourism department is very proudly displaying the history of Moonta and the children who worked here 150 years ago. I would shudder if any child known to me has to live in the conditions that existed 150 years ago. We are thankful to the fact that Australia has become a federation. We are thankful to the fact that there are laws against child labor. We are thankful to the fact that there are minimum award wages. We are thankful to the fact that government has to provide education to each child, and it has to ensure that the workplaces are safe. I am feeling that today's South Australia is a much better place to live than things were 150 years ago. Thank you.